Let us look at the past perfect and let us note the change from the active voice into the passive voice in some sentences. So the sixth one is past perfect. Past perfect. In the past perfect, we have few sentences for you to look at. The boys had eaten all the cakes before the party began. We are talking about the past perfect. The boys had eaten. The boys had eaten all the cakes. All the cakes before the party began. Okay. The boys had eaten all the cakes, had eaten before the party began. And that's in the active voice in the past perfect. So that is active. Now let's look at the changeover from the active into the past passive in the past perfect. All the cakes had been eaten. Had been eaten. All the cakes had been eaten by the boys. By the boys before the party began. Before the party began. Okay, that's in the passive. Let's look at it. All the cakes had been eaten by the boys before the party began, and that's in the passive voice. Okay, now let's look at another sentence in the past perfect. In the past perfect, let's look at another sentence. Had the farmers reaped the crop before the rains fell? Had the farmers, in the past perfect, had the farmers reaped the crops, reaped the crops before the rains fell. The rains fell. Okay, now that is in the reaped. We are talking about the past perfect. Had the farmers reaped the crops before the rains fell? And that's in the active voice. We are going to do the changeover. Let's look at the changeover into the passive voice. Had the crops been reaped by the farmers before the rains fell, had the crops been reaped, had the crop been reaped by the farmers, by the farmers before the rains fell, been reaped. And this is in the passive voice. Now we are looking at this couple of sentences in the past perfect. We're looking at the active voice, noting the change from the active into the passive in the past perfect. And we have two sentences here. One, the boys had eaten all the cakes before the party began. Active. The boys eaten all the cake. Now change over from the active into the passive. All the cakes had been eaten by the boys before the party began. Passive voice. And in the second sentence we have the active voice in the past perfect. Had the farmers reaped the crop before the rains fell? That's the active voice. And finally in the passive voice changeover in the past perfect. Had the crops being reaped by the farmer before the rains fell? That's in the passive. Okay? So we looked at in the past perfect two sentences and we noted the changeover from the active into the passive voice in the two sentences.